want to welcome you. My name is Elliot Mendis. I'm the National Development Director at Democratic Majority for Israel. On behalf of our President and CEO, Mark Millman, our board, our co-chairs, Todd Richmond and Ann Lewis, I want to thank you for being here with us today as we continue to see the unfolding of events of the horrific attacks by Hamas. DMFI has been working around the clock since that moment to support democratic leadership and make sure America stands shoulder to shoulder with Israel. We've been in constant touch with our allies on the Hill. We've shared briefings, we've shared materials, and we've encouraged Democrats to speak out strongly and consistently against Hamas. In addition to mobilizing last week around a new aid package, this week we are mobilizing and urging the Senate to quickly and swiftly confirm Jack Lew as the new U.S. ambassador to Israel. And finally, we're sharing explainer content on social media and pushing back a lot of misinformation that's out there. Along those lines, please consider following us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at DemMaj for Israel. You can see our tagline on the bottom of the screen down there. And finally, just a couple more housekeeping pieces. If you have a question today and you're on through Zoom, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. And if you're live streaming somewhere else, you can put your question into the comments section and we'll get to as many as we can. Now, it's my pleasure to turn over to our President and CEO, Mark Millman.
Thank you so much, Elliot. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being with us today. Naftali Bennett, our special guest, served as the 13th Prime Minister of Israel. Prior to entering politics, Mr. Bennett had a notable career both in military service and in the private sector. He served in two of the Israel Defense Forces' most elite units, Sayeret Matkal and Maglan, where he was a commander fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon and other terrorists in the West Bank. After leaving the military, he founded and led several successful high-tech startups. He began his political career as a top aide to Bibi Netanyahu, eventually rising through the ranks to hold various ministerial positions, including Minister of Defense. In 2021, he presided over the most diverse government in Israel's history, which included parties from the left, the center, and the right, as well as an independent Arab party. As you know, we live in a highly environment where the center left tends to denigrate the center right and vice versa. Naftali Bennett is a man of the right. I am not. So frankly, I didn't expect to think much of him when I first met him. But over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to spend some hours with him, and I was frankly surprised to find a brilliant, thoughtful, deeply committed, compassionate, and extraordinarily effective leader. And I'm very proud to introduce to you former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mark. I do want to thank first and foremost Mark Millman, a wonderful friend, and I can assure you that our divides are minuscule compared to what we agree upon, and that's that we want a strong and democratic and thriving Israel for the Jewish people, and we want a strong American-Israeli alliance. So, you know, if there's one lesson I've learned over the past few years is that what connects us is much greater than what divides us. What I'd like to do within just very few minutes is tell you what happened, what's going on, where it's going to, what it means, and what we need from you. We took a devastating hit last 10 days ago on Shabbat at 6:29 a.m. Now we know from roughly 99 different breaches, Hamas infiltrated Israel in the thousands. And in some communities, they managed to conquer the kibbutz and massacre people. In many other kibbutzim, and this is less known, the local defense civil force, which is a team of typically anywhere between 6 and 12 civilians that are reservists. So in many locations, we persevered, we won and fended off, killed those terrorists. Even, I can give you sort of a rule of thumb, when we were outnumbered 1 to 3, we typically won. When we were outnumbered 1 to 20, 1 to 10, it was just too much. So for example, in Kibbutz Mefalsim, Kibbutz Alumim, Kibbutz Saad, Kibbutz Erez, in Moshav Miftachim, in Nir Am, all of these places, just typical moms and dads that were part of the defense team took their pistols or rifles, and you might have 6 of them fighting 30 terrorists and winning. And in all those places and more that I just named, not one civilian was harmed. I'm saying this because I know there's this understandable dark atmosphere, and because we did take a devastating hit. I'm saying it because the terrorists were very courageous against babies and 84-year-old women and severing heads of little children and burning families. But whenever we took them heads on, even at a very disadvantaged ratio, we won. And this is important to keep in mind. During all of Sunday, all of Shabbat into Sunday, we were in meaningful battles, especially at the party in Kibbutz Be'eri, Kibbutz Kfar Aza, Kibbutz Nir Oz. Those would be the main and worst hit areas. I visited a bunch of them. It just looks like after the Shoah, after a pogrom. Just the homes one after another are burnt. You can see what happened there. And I want to emphasize, they didn't come just to kill. They came to torture, to ridicule, to rape, and they did just the worst atrocities. That basically petered down about a week ago. All right, so let's call it last Wednesday. There were no more major combat efforts going on. From time to time, there might be a small group of terrorists that pop up somewhere, and by and large, we kill them, and so it's looking okay. We are right now in a lull between the initial attack and our counteroffensive. So it's sort of like the period between 9/11 and then the counterattack on Afghanistan back in 2001. So right now there's not a war going on as we speak. Israel is attacking Hamas in Gaza to some extent, but right now it's a lull. A few points of emphasis and what we've learned and what's important to know. So first of all, we're dealing with Nazis. And I want to tell you, never in my life have I used the term Nazis, except on the Nazis themselves. This is the first time in my life that I am using it, because they are. My point is that the only difference between Nazis and our enemies is the ability. And if we're not here to fight them out, now we know. If there was any doubt what their goal is to murder each and every one of the last Jews in the world. That's what they want to do. No more questions about that. Second point I want to make. Hamas is an arm of an octopus. The octopus is the Iranian octopus. This Iranian octopus of terror and horror and murder, its head is in Tehran, and it sends its arms, its tentacles all across the Middle East, to Lebanon with Hezbollah, to Gaza with Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Just to illustrate this point, it's not a cliche, these are not platitudes. Iran funds 100% of Islamic Jihad's budget, 100% of Hezbollah's military budget, 20% of Hamas's budget. It arms them, trains them. And I'm saying this because we can't, in my opinion, the doctrine that I promoted as prime minister was to view all of them holistically. And if I'm hit by one arm of the octopus, I don't have to necessarily fight that arm. I can go for the jugular, there's soldiers all around here, so I'm a bit distracted. I'm, by the way, in the south, tanks all in this area, thousands of soldiers getting prepared. Back to my point, if an octopus hit me with one arm, I don't necessarily have to fight that arm. I can cut off another arm, go for the neck, go for the head, strangle the neck so no blood reaches the arms. I'm saying this because we need to starve Iran from funds, because those funds go directly to its arms in the form of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards. So setting that aside, another element that's worth being aware of, Israeli public is in trauma. There's not a family that doesn't have a friend, a member of family or relative, someone who's been hit. I lost a friend from my military service, a good friend my age, 51 years old, who volunteered to go and fight, and he saved lives, and he took a bullet in his stomach and he died. And so many friends have lost their boys and or girls. So this is very personal, but so the country has taken a huge hit, but at the same time, the people are energized to fight back. I'm saying what happened here rinsed away all the nonsense that we wasted, all the energy we wasted on the judicial reform and reasonability clause. It looks like ancient history, and for a good reason. Right and left have united. Everyone is volunteering. We are across the board at all reserve units, anywhere between 130% to 150% enlistment rates. That means there's more people who want to volunteer than we can actually absorb, because typically old guys like me that have been discharged from the reserve a decade ago, we want to fight. I wanted to fight, but they didn't let me. The Shin Bet said, no, we can't let you do that. People are volunteering everywhere. Blood runs, food. One of the big risks now is that we'll gain weight with all the chocolate cakes that were being sent from all across the country. It's just beautiful. It's amazing. Where is it going? Well, Israel's policy is to never deliberately hit civilians. Hence, we told the northern side of the Gaza Strip, the population, to evacuate south so they can reach safe haven, because we don't want to hit them. We don't do that stuff. I would say it's hard to know exactly. I would say a ballpark of about 600,000 Gazans from the north have moved south, but still there's a few 100,000 that have not, and they're in process of doing it. In the very near future, I don't know the date, and I'm not part of government. I'm not prime minister right now. Israel's going to attack. Israel's going to attack with mighty force. Before I send a soldier into an area, we will destroy that area as to sort of field or sort of create a clean road for that for those soldiers. And our goal is very clear: to destroy Hamas. We need to wake up whenever this war is over, to a day that we don't need the Iron Dome, we don't need the walls, we don't need the shelters, a whole new Gaza. That's the goal that the government has set and articulated time and again. Everyone in Israel is willing to fight and wants to fight back. The goal is very high. So it'll take time. It'll take a long time. I don't know how much. The initial acts of entering Gaza may take weeks. Then afterwards, from previous lessons, when we had this, and I fought back then in 2002, we did the same thing in Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank. The initial battle was, you remember when 1,500 Jews were murdered over a couple of years. In the second Intifada, we finally said enough is enough. We retook Judea and Samaria. That took about, I want to say, a month and a half. I had been a CEO in New York, and I flew back to fight and fought in Tulkarem. And then after the initial battles and after conquering the area, it took another couple of years to clean it up. And for the past 20 years now, we've not had buses blowing up in Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim, Haifa, and by and large, Israel has been safe. So we know how to do this. It's tough, but we know how to do it. It takes time. Now I'll talk about what you guys can do. Basically, what we need is time and patience, strategic patience. It's going to take time. I know we're gaining and we have a tremendous amount of sympathy right now because we were slaughtered. But I don't want sympathy. I want respect and fear from my enemies. And that's why what we're going to need is to understand in advance. It's going to take a long time. We need to be in this for the long haul until we have a new Gaza. I'll stop here and I'll take a couple of questions because I got to get off in about 6 minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here, Mr. Prime Minister. You fought in Lebanon, and obviously there's a real concern about a second front opening up in the north. Can you tell us a little bit about how that front would be different? What other challenges, outside of just the stress on the system of fighting two fronts at the same time?
Sure. Obviously, there's a very vivid and tangible risk that the Hezbollah will enter the fray. They're playing around with us. They're playing on the brinkmanship. We prefer not, but we're ready for yes. Israel certainly can deal with two fronts, and certainly in Lebanon compared to Gaza, right now we're in full preparedness. So in the military strategy, the big advantage is when you fight against someone who's not prepared. We're now waiting and all prepared there with divisions up there. And in the meantime, there have been a few attempts to infiltrate Israel, and we killed the Hezbollah terrorists. So we're prepared for it. I won't go into how exactly I would handle it. I would try and sort of serialize the fronts as opposed to do it in parallel. But again, as I said, we can deal with it. It would involve massive rockets on Israel. And on all civilian centers. The meaning for Hezbollah and for Lebanon would be the total destruction of Lebanon. Now, from Nasrallah's perspective, he holds two functions, or wears two hats, if you will. The first function, he's a servant of Iran. The second function, though, is that he claims to be the protector of Lebanon. If he opens war with us, he would be written down in history as the destroyer of Lebanon. Hezbollah is a threat to Israel. It's not an existential threat. We would take a huge hit, no doubt, but that would be final and total destruction of Lebanon, which anyway is already a bankrupt country with one of the worst economies of any country over the past century. So we're ready for that. As I said, Iran itself should not feel it's immune. That was my doctrine. I'm not sure the government fully continued my doctrine. I always felt we have to focus on the head of the octopus. But short answer is we're ready, prefer not, but okay with.
Thank you. And I know you have to run in a minute, but if you could just say a word about how you and maybe the Israeli public are seeing about the American response to what's happened, and specifically to President Biden, who has been speaking about this with great regularity, was in the country this week. How is that being internalized by Israelis at this moment?
Look, amazingly well. The President Biden has, and his administration, and the people of the United States have really been amazing, more than we could expect. Now, we don't expect America to fight our wars. We're not asking America to send soldiers in harm's way. That's ours to do. But it means the world to us, those aircraft carriers, the replenishment of stuff, and generally just being here and saying we're with you. So I want to thank thank the president, the administration, Congress, and of course the American people, who truly understand that this is not a two-side story. there's not two sides to this story. They're not, let's understand Israel's narrative and let's understand Hamas's narrative. There's nothing to understand. This is a murderous Nazi regime. And just like there were no two sides, and let's understand the Nazi narrative, in World War II, there's no two narratives here. So it means a lot. We have to ensure that Israel has freedom of action. And again, we need the time to get this done. We don't have to rush into foolish things. We can take a breath. Israel is strong. And I want to thank all of you. I know everyone here on the call is here because you care. So thank you very much. And Mark, thank you, my friend. And let's go get those bastards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Really appreciate it.
Take care.
I'm going to turn it over now to one of our board co-chairs, Ann Lewis, who's going to introduce Congressman Brendan Boyle, who's joining us from events at the House today. So, Ann, turn it over to you.
And quite an eventful day in the House. But I'm not sure I can match Prime Minister Bennett's last words, but I'm going to try with my introduction. Congressman Boyle, I remember hearing from you at about this time 4 years ago, when you were one of the early advocates, voices for Joe Biden's presidential campaign. And I gotta say, that's the kind of political wisdom that has propelled your career. So for those who don't know him, Congressman Brendan Boyle represents Pennsylvania's 2nd District. He's the son of an immigrant. His father was a school custodian. His mother was a crossing guard. He brings their experience and their values to Congress every day. When he was elected to the Pennsylvania State Legislature in 2008, he was the first Democrat to represent his district. Brendan Boyle was elected to Congress in 2014. He was an upset winner. He's been reelected ever since. We know him to be a staunch supporter of the U.S.-Israel relationship, including recent supporting the addition of Israel into the visa waiver program, working to strengthen the relationship between two countries economically and security collaboration. We're just so glad to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann, and I appreciate that great introduction, and I hope you can hear me okay.
We hear you fine.
I ask that because, and excuse my setup, I typically have something a bit more professional, but just to kind of break the fourth wall and let you know where I am right now, I am in a phone booth in the members' cloakroom, just 5 feet right there is the House floor. I am here because I literally can't afford to be in my office a 10-minute walk away, because at any moment now, we may be voting on a potential resolution to this speaker mess that the current majority has inflicted upon us. So their chaos, their chaos would not be good at any time, but especially at this time, with such serious events happening on the world stage. Let me also say it is a pleasure to be part of the same program as Naftali Bennett, someone for whom I have a great deal of respect. And he ended his remarks with, "Let's get the bastards." Being born and raised and representing the city of Philadelphia, he's speaking my language. So I want to echo those thoughts as well. I also want to take a word, because as Ann referenced, I was one of the first members of Congress to endorse Joe Biden. I actually went to him personally. This has been written about in a couple of books since then. But in 2018, I went to see him personally. He was then at the Penn Center. And I urged him to run for president because I believe there was a narrative building about the Democratic Party that I knew to be false. I thought that Joe Biden would be our best candidate to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. And I believed he would be a damn good president. I hope this isn't immodest if I say I feel vindicated on both counts. And I've been especially proud of Joe Biden in this past week. I remember hearing from some friends who are not Democrats, geez, has the Democratic Party abandoned Israel? Do Democrats still stand by Israel? They don't ask that question anymore. Joe Biden's trip this past week and the last several days will go down truly in American history. Our strong support for Israel is without question now, not just to those in Israel or the United States, but frankly to anyone around the world. I also just want to say and take a moment, and I've already done this publicly, but you can't say it enough. I want to express my deep sympathies to all of those who may have lost loved ones, family members, and friends in Israel over the last couple weeks. I would also point out, by the way, because I don't think this aspect of it has been talked about enough. At the moment, 31 fellow American citizens have been killed. So this actually will end up being, and I'm afraid that that 31 figure is likely to grow. So already, this is actually one of the most deadly terrorist events in American history. Of course, obviously being in addition to the deadliest in Israeli history. Now, moving forward, I have no doubt whatsoever that there will be a robust aid package to our strongest ally, Israel, especially when it comes to replenishment of Iron Dome, something that I've strongly supported throughout my career. I've personally visited one of the Iron Dome batteries. I'm always so amazed and impressed that you typically have 19, 20-year-olds who are making split-second decisions. Congress nowadays, I'm here a decade and I'm 46 and I'm still considered young. These guys are really young, guys and women too, 19, 20 years old and making life and death decisions, those who are operating the Iron Dome batteries. So we need to do that, and we need to do much more as well. I think President Biden tonight, my understanding and talking to the White House earlier this morning, will lay out exactly what the requirements and the asks are for that supplemental. But that gets us back actually to why I'm sitting in the members' cloakroom in a phone booth, wondering at what moment here will we vote for Speaker. This dysfunction in the House of Representatives is coming at an enormously serious and dangerous time. The Republican majority, in case you haven't noticed, is a complete mess. We need to ensure this comes to an end quite quickly. I am someone who has publicly and privately said to some of my Republican friends, I support a bipartisan path forward. I do believe that the vast majority of this body wants to get to that, wants to reject the extremes that we see among some here in this body, which frankly, that extreme has a rather outsized voice at the moment. I think this is a time in which we need to silence that voice and enable good common sense legislation to happen. And I predict once this speaker situation is resolved, which hopefully will be soon, that the very first piece of legislation you will see is a large bipartisan vote for aid to Israel. And with that, I will pause. Happy to take any questions. And again, just so proud to be supportive of and supported by DMFI.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman. I'm sorry you're sitting in a phone booth, but we are very glad that you're in Congress. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and then I think you're going to get questions from both of us. So now I get to introduce Gabby Deutch, who a reporter who is as important to me in the morning as that first cup of coffee. And I suspect I'm speaking for many of the people who are watching us today. Gabby is, of course, a Washington correspondent for Jewish Insider. Her reporting on Amnesty International last year set off huge shockwaves that are still reverberating. Now she's reporting and is going to talk to us about what's happening at some colleges and universities, both at the student level and, even more disturbing perhaps, at the administration level, as they respond to Hamas's murderous attacks. Gabby was previously a contributing writer at Jewish Insider. She's worked on the Atlantic's global affairs team and at NewsGuard, a company that fights online misinformation. Take it away, Gabby Deutch.
And thank you so much for that introduction. As someone who needs lots of coffee in the morning to do my work at Jewish Insider, there is no higher praise, so I am honored. And thank you to DMFI for inviting me to be here. Following a powerful congressman and a former Israeli prime minister is a very tough act to follow, but I will try my best. And I want to start by echoing something that Prime Minister Bennett said about what he's seeing as an incredible unified response in Israel. And that mirrors, I think, what we're seeing in the Jewish community here, in Congress, in Washington in general, which is loud and widespread support for Israel and for Israel's response to the Hamas terrorist attack. Of course, there are some loud voices to the contrary, but when you actually look at those numbers, I think this is a time of really unprecedented support and unity within especially the American Jewish community in terms of its support for and solidarity with Israel. So I want to start with that, which is good news, and then talk a bit about something that is unfortunately not quite so positive. So as Anne said, I'm based here in the United States, and in my reporting these past couple of weeks, I've been covering how everything that's happening in Israel and in Gaza is playing out here at home. And so one of the biggest stories, one that a lot of people are sort of obsessively following because unfortunately there's new angles every single day, is what's happening on American colleges and universities in response to the terrorist attacks in Israel. And we've all been following this story since October 7th, and I'll talk about that, but I want to step back a few weeks before that just to add some context for all of this. And some of you may have been following this story as well. Congressman Boyle, you're in Pennsylvania, so I assume you've seen this too, but last month at the University of Pennsylvania, there was a festival that was hosted at the school called the Palestine Rights Literature Festival, with a number of speakers who have a history of not just hostility toward Israel, but deep anti-Semitism, like Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. And this festival took place on Yom Kippur. It was close to the campus Hillel, and facing pressure from Jewish students and alumni, the president of Penn put out a statement that she recognized some of the speakers had, perhaps espoused anti-Semitism, but ultimately said it was not her place or the place of the university to intervene to either stop the festival, move it off campus, citing concerns about freedom of speech. And so as a result, we saw more than 2,000 Jewish alumni from Penn send a letter to their president expressing their concern, urging her to take a stronger stance against anti-Semitism. So all of that was before Hamas came into Israel and killed more than 1,400 Israelis. Now, of course, everything that was happening in that one debate is magnified, and it's happening on dozens of campuses. We're seeing university administrators, a handful of whom are releasing very strong statements supporting Jewish students, condemning the terrorist attacks, but we're seeing other schools, and this is some of the most prominent universities in this country and in the world, that are equivocating, that will not name what happened, that are trying to both sides something that was just a brutal, horrible attack. And so I want to talk about Harvard, which is just one university, but it's probably the best known in the world. And so when something happens at Harvard, it's automatically international news, national news. And so as many of you probably know, just hours after the attack, a group of more than 30 student organizations put out a statement saying that they held Israel entirely responsible for what had happened. Of course, this was a terrorist attack that killed Israeli civilians, but in their telling, this was Israel's fault because of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. So this letter went viral, and for the next day and a half or 2 days, nobody heard anything from Harvard's leadership. And so this was what was coming out of Harvard, was Harvard students hold Israel responsible for terrorist attack. And so I started talking to Jewish students at Harvard, Jewish alumni who were incredibly upset. They ultimately stepped in and put together a letter signed by more than 4,000 Jewish students and Jewish alumni, calling on Harvard both to condemn the attacks and to condemn the student letter. And what we saw was really just an incredible exercise in, I don't think leadership is the right word, but we saw the Harvard president put out 3 different statements over the course of 5 days, instead of just one at the beginning that was taking a moral stand. And at first, it didn't strongly condemn the terrorist attack. And then the next letter also referred to this student statement. And then by the end of the week, Harvard's president, who's only been in this job for 2 or 3 months, sent out a video even further describing her feelings about how horrible the Hamas attack was. And some of the alumni of Harvard, I don't need to tell the people on this call, I'm sure some of you are among them, decided to respond to this, not just with the letter, but also by, to use a cliche, putting their money where their mouth is. So we've seen prominent Harvard alumni decide to stop supporting the school financially. I reported that Idan Ofer, who's an Israeli businessman, was resigning from the board of the Harvard Kennedy School. And this week, in really huge news that I think the university will have to reckon with, my colleagues and I reported that the Wexner Foundation, which is one of the best known philanthropic foundations in the Jewish world, was deciding to end a decades-long partnership that it has had with the Kennedy School to send Israelis to earn masters there, because both of the weak response over the past 2 weeks and also what they described as a feeling from Israeli students feeling ostracized and marginalized on campus just in general over the past several years. I've heard this as well at other universities, going back to Penn, where this saga started really a few weeks ago. Mark Rowan, who's a billionaire investor, said that he was going to stop supporting the school financially because of its poor response to anti-Semitism. And Ronald Lauder, who's another prominent Jewish leader and philanthropist, essentially put Penn on notice that if they don't fix what they're doing, if they don't step up to anti-Semitism, he also would stop his support. And he has a master's program named after him. These are really important people, and perhaps it will make a difference in the way that they think about speaking about anti-Semitism. So that's what's happening at the high level. And then what does that actually mean for Jewish students, for Israeli students? I think a lot of them are afraid. I'm sure for many of you, your kids are telling you what's been happening on their schools over the past week and a half. Last Thursday, Students for Justice in Palestine, which is an extreme group that has aligned with Hamas, organized a national day of resistance, which took place across the country. You know, these were campus chapters who had put out their own statements, taking the side of Hamas, calling it legitimate resistance. And they held campuses on campus quad, or protests, that is, on campus quads. And Jewish students were afraid. I've spoken to some Israeli students who didn't go to class at the end of last week because they were worried for their safety. And I think for good reason. There was one Israeli student at Columbia who was physically assaulted last week. The student had been hanging up posters on campus with the names and photos of the people who had been taken hostage. And one person who came to help ostensibly hang up these posters said, "I'm Jewish, I care about this." And then a couple hours later went back, tore them all down. When they saw the Israeli student who was trying to stop them, this other person attacked them and got arrested. So these are might seem like theoretical questions. It might seem like, oh, it's just college kids, you know, why do they take everything so personally? But it really affects the way that Jewish students and Israeli students feel comfortable on campus. It affects their personal safety. And just to share a couple more examples of some of what we're seeing, and this I think is going to continue to play out for weeks, if not months. Last week, the student body president at NYU Law School, which is one of the best law schools in the country, sent an email out to the entire student body. And this is supposed to be a weekly email where they just say, here's what clubs are meeting, hope your semester is going well. And instead, the student took that occasion to write a note saying that Israel bears the full responsibility for the loss of life in Israel. It just makes no sense, but this is some of the language that we're seeing. And this student ended up losing their job at a law firm over it. But of course, for many people, there aren't consequences, and some of it's even happening anonymously. I think one of the most egregious things I have seen at the University of Michigan, one of the campuses with one of the biggest Jewish populations in America, the student newspaper, the very prominent and esteemed Michigan Daily, ran an op-ed saying, and I quote here, "There's a moral onus on all of us to support the Palestinian resistance," which is to say Hamas in this case. The op-ed was published anonymously because the student who wrote it said they were afraid of their safety. So here we have a student saying there's a moral onus on Michigan students to support Hamas, which is killing Jews, but they don't want to be associated with it, which I think tells you something about that kind of argument. And I want to just wrap up with one story from a conversation that I had today. I'm working on a story about the experiences of Israeli students on American campuses over the past couple of weeks. And many of them do not feel supported by their friends who aren't Jewish, by university administrators. I just got off the phone with an undergrad at Columbia who is Israeli, and he's currently in Israel. He flew back last week to join his unit in the reserves. He's in a WhatsApp group for his major, just supposed to be where people share assignments and talk about their classes. And people are attacking him in this group for the fact that he's gone back to Israel to fight with the IDF. So unfortunately, I could speak about stories like this all day long. I'm going to stop here, and I just do want to end with one positive note. All of these people I've spoken with, they're concerned about university leadership. They're concerned about what they're seeing or not seeing from friends who aren't Jewish. But throughout all of this, they've felt incredibly supported by campus Jewish communities, by Hillels and Chabads and Jewish friends. And I've seen and heard just really amazing stories of community and community building and how people are coming together at this time. So I hope that gives all of us some strength as we think about our own communities and how to be connected to each other. So thank you again for having me, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Gabby, for that incredible reporting, for everything you're doing. And Congressman, I want to just take a step back where some of these things intersect. Gabby mentioned the SJP demonstration at the Capitol, around the Capitol yesterday. And while there had been real unanimity amongst Democrats in the immediate wake of the attacks, you're starting to see some of the fault lines that had existed before resurface, with some folks demanding an immediate ceasefire, not aligned with the position where President Biden has stood in terms of standing with Israel. How do you see that playing out within the Democratic caucus? As we heard from the former prime minister, this war is going to go on, and we've seen how these things play out over time. So where do you see that going within your caucus?
Yeah, so first, responding to some of Gabby's reporting, and in the interest of full disclosure, I do have an affiliation. Actually, I have affiliation with both Harvard and Penn. Harvard because I'm a graduate, master's degree from Harvard's Kennedy School, and spent 2 wonderful years there. And Penn, I have no formal affiliation, but it is, well, not in my district. It is obviously in Philadelphia, and certainly a lot of the Penn folks are in our office quite a bit, asking for support for all sorts of various things to help the university. So it's very, for 2 universities I think very highly of and care about. This has been a painful experience. I've been on some of the, not at Penn, but Harvard. I'm on a number of the alumni email distribution lists, both at the Kennedy School and the university overall, and it's been a very divisive time. I have to say, though, it didn't just start in the last 2 weeks. I remember being a graduate student at the Kennedy School a little over 20 years ago, and walking by a poster board and seeing an advertisement for something called BDS. And that was my first exposure to the BDS movement, which was not as well known then 2 decades ago as it would become. So unfortunately, this has been growing over quite some time on some college campuses. I also don't want to overstate this. So it is worrying. Some of the videos that we've seen, truly heinous. That said, though, let's also recognize that polling continues to show an overwhelming majority of both Democrats and Americans, regardless of political affiliation, strongly support Israel, believe that it is justified. Frankly, some of the strongest polling I've ever seen in terms of support for Israel had been over the last 10 days. And the Democratic caucus here reflects that. Now, that said, Especially for those like myself who are in overwhelmingly Democratic districts. For the political nerds on here, you'll know what a D+21 means. I'm in a congressional district that's a little over 70 to 30 Democratic. My race always is in the primary. There is an outsized, loud number of folks who criticize, me. I've been on the receiving end of it, and other Democrats in similar districts who have been vocal and well-known advocates for Israel. That number has been growing. It's still not a majority, not even close to a majority, but the trend line is worrying. And the question is, over time, does some of the extremism and anti-Israel, and frankly, also anti-Semitic fervor we see on campuses, does that bleed into the larger society as these folks grow up and age into positions of power? That is something that we will have to combat at some point. I think the Democratic caucus, specifically here in the House, will continue to be strong and overwhelming in support of Israel. But we do have I'd say a group of about 15 to 20 out of over 200, so roughly 10%, who are not supportive of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And so that division will continue, but we should be mindful, even though the press wants to give both of these equal weight, just look at the numbers and look at the votes. It's not 50-50, it's roughly 90 to 10.
Great. Thank you, Congressman. Gabby, let me follow that up with, this is an administration that had rolled out an unprecedented plan to combat anti-Semitism, whole of government approach, which we're now seeing be needed even more urgently. Are you hearing from the White House how they're going to be deploying this strategy? Was there anything to be required from Congress to push it forward or to fund it, given the events that we're seeing at universities and in Jewish communities around the country?
Sure. I think, as you correctly noted, the Biden administration earlier this year released the first ever national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. And those of us who work in the Jewish world, and my colleagues and I at Jewish publications, followed it closely and the planning. And once it was released, I think there was a question about how it would actually hold up when it was needed. Anti-Semitism has been on the rise the past several years, but of course, the past 2 weeks have provided that testing ground, I think, for this strategy. There's still a lot that we are waiting to see how it will play out from the White House. I do think, whether it's because of this strategy or just general work that this administration has been doing on anti-Semitism, on hate crimes, on nonprofit security the past several years, there's an increased awareness about how something that's happening overseas can affect the Jewish community here at home, aside from the Biden administration's actual response to the situation in Israel. So we've seen the FBI, the Homeland Security Director, speak about how they're monitoring threats to synagogues and Jewish institutions here in the US. The White House has talked about increasing funding for the National Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which gives money to nonprofits and religious institutions, including synagogues and JCCs, to get federal funding to help them up their security. So that I think is a really big part of it. Something that I am monitoring is how this White House will respond to what's happening on universities. There's definitely some awareness and discussion in the anti-Semitism plan about educational institutions, about teaching about anti-Semitism in all of its different forms. And education is so important right now, when it's easy for people to say that, anti-Zionism, opposition to Israel, support for Hamas is not akin to anti-Semitism. But as we hear from Jewish students and just Jews in general who are afraid right now, we know that there is a great deal of overlap. So I'll be monitoring how they're responding on campuses, but there are some early signs that appear to be hopeful.
Congressman, we've seen in this age of misinformation, proliferation of stories that are not actually true, but can do enormous damage very quickly before they're retracted. Is there more that Congress, the Democrats, leadership should be doing to try and tamp down on this, and what that might look like?
Well, you're exactly right. But just to give you an idea of how old this problem is, Mark Twain had many good quotes. One of them was, "A lie has made its way all the way around the world before the truth has even had time to tie its shoes." Now with social media, that is, frankly, what was true in Mark Twain's time is now exponentially true in our time. I have to say, this story in the last 48 hours about what was reported, the alleged Israeli attack, allegedly on a hospital, some of the media, quote unquote, reporting on that is one of the most irresponsible things that I can remember. To be fair, there is a fog of war situation. And I know that they have challenging jobs, but I hope some of the larger news organizations, which attempt to be responsible, will learn from this experience, because the immediate reporting of that incident, which we now know to be false, that's done a lot of damage. It immediately impacted President Biden's visit. Of course, the visit that was to take place in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan got canceled. We have seen the condemnations and protests / riots in other parts of the Middle East after this alleged story came out. So unfortunately, I don't have a silver bullet or an easy answer to this question. In fact, I've spoken on this topic before, literally given speeches just about this topic. And what I've concluded is this is the single largest issue with which we have to deal in Western democracies. Because the reality is the technology is evolving so that what is already a problem is, I fear, going to get much worse. I think there are things we can do in Congress, funding to support local news sources, which are going belly up left and right. I'm co-sponsoring a bipartisan bill that would do that and that would help. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That is no silver bullet. This is really the biggest challenge for our time. And it's not just in the United States. I'll leave you with this. When the attacks were happening that very early Saturday morning, a couple of weeks ago, I was over at the NATO Parliament. I am a member of the US delegation to the NATO Parliament. I serve in the leadership of the organization. So I was literally presiding in the chair at NATO when the attacks commenced. I have to tell you, the reactions from our NATO colleagues, these are fellow parliamentarians from the British Parliament, German Bundestag, etc., all 31 NATO countries, it was overwhelmingly supportive of Israel. We immediately that day released a statement reflecting that. But we also talked privately, a number of us parliamentarians, about the immediate challenge we were going to have in this conflict with fake videos and, if I might use this term, real fake news. The other side is pretty sophisticated in sending this stuff out, and we are aware what a challenge this is going to be as this conflict continues.
Great. Thank you, Congressman. I know you have to run. And Gabby, thank you for your time as well. It's wonderful being with both of you today. And thank you for everything you're doing.
And thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. And if everyone just stay on another couple minutes, I'm going to bring Todd Richmond, who is our DMFI Other Board Co-Chair, back on to close us out today with just a few words. Todd?
Great. Thank you, Elliot. And as Elliot said, just give us another 2 minutes if you can, on behalf of myself and Ann Lewis, along with our President CEO, Mark Mellman, and our board. We want to thank the Prime Minister, my good friend, Congressman Boyle, and of course, my morning cup of coffee every day, Gabby Deutch. You guys do some great work. Listen, I'm going to be short, I'm going to be succinct, and I'm going to ask you guys for some help. As the Prime Minister said, the Biden administration, the people of the United States have been amazing, more than they could ever expect it, and it means the world to them. But he also talked about it not being a two-sided story. And there are people today on Capitol Hill that are promoting a narrative that is the other side of the story. And we need your help to fight what I'm calling right now is that second front. Right now, Israel has really a one front. The second front right now is happening here in the United States, where we have to ensure that the US Congress is going to continue to support Israel during this time of need. And as a ground war starts, and the small but outsized, loud, small group of people continue to protest against Israel, like we saw yesterday, whether they're supporting the Ceasefire Act, or we have members of Congress that are continuing to promote the lies on their social media in terms of what happened with that hospital just a few days ago. And there's one organization that is really on the Hill that is within the Democratic Party that is working to ensure that we can stop that. But we can only do it with your help. So I'm imploring every person on this call to make sure that they sign up at dmfi.org, continue to do our action alerts, forward those action alerts to all of your friends. And most importantly, please support us financially. Whether you're giving $18, $180, $1,800, or $18,000, whatever you can do, we must lobby. We must give until it hurts. Because if we don't fight this fight right now on this second front, nobody is going to. So please go to dmfi.org, dmfi.org support, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you and have a wonderful day.